Let's talk about something that sounds, well, impossible. The rules of war. I mean, come on. Rules and war in the same sentence? How can you possibly have rules for, well, for chaos? But believe it or not, there's a massive body of international law that does exactly that. So let's get into it.
And that's really the big question, isn't it? Can you actually apply a rule book to something as brutal, as destructive as a war? I mean, at first glance, you'd think, no way. It's like trying to impose order on the ultimate form of disorder.
But here's the thing. While it might sound like a modern, maybe even a naive idea, this attempt to put limits on war, it's actually an incredibly old human impulse. We're talking thousands of years, stretching across all kinds of different cultures and civilizations. Just take a look at this. This is from the 7th century. Abu Bakr, a leader in the early Islamic community, is giving these instructions to his army right before they go into battle. And look at what he's saying. It's not just don't kill kids, women, or the elderly, which is already huge. He's also talking about not harming trees or killing livestock unless you need it for food. It shows this really deep-seated desire to draw a line, to say, okay, fighting the enemy is one thing, but just pointless, total destruction, that's something else entirely. Okay, so if people have been trying to do this for centuries, what's the point? Why go through all the trouble of making laws for lawlessness? Well, as you're about to see, the reasons are actually super practical and, yeah, also deeply humane. All right, so why have these laws? At the most basic level, it's about trying to dial back the absolute worst parts of war. It's about protecting everyone, soldiers and civilians, from suffering that doesn't actually help win the war. Safeguarding prisoners, the wounded. But honestly, that last point might be the most important one of all, making it possible to have peace again. Just think about it for a second. If wars were fought with zero limits, with absolutely no lines you couldn't cross, how could two sides ever come back from that? These rules, they're designed to leave a path open, a path back to peace. And you can actually trace how these old customs slowly, bit by bit, turned into real, solid international law. It really kicks off in 1864 with the very first Geneva Convention, which was all about protecting wounded soldiers. Then, in 1907, things get broader. The Hague Conventions start regulating how you can fight. But the really big one, that comes in 1949, right after World War II. The modern Geneva Conventions expand protections to prisoners of war and, so importantly, to civilians. And then you get to 1998, where the world says, okay, we need a permanent court to actually prosecute individuals for war crimes. So that's the history. But how does it all actually work in practice? Well, the whole system, all of modern international humanitarian law, is built on 5 core principles. And seriously, if you get these 5 ideas, you'll understand the thinking behind pretty much every major rule of modern warfare. First up, we've got military necessity. Think of this as the first hurdle any military action has to clear. The question is simple. Is what you're doing actually necessary to help defeat the enemy? So, for example, blowing up a bridge to stop enemy supplies from getting through? Yeah, that's probably a military necessity. But bombing a random apartment building just to spread terror? Nope. Fails the test. It serves no real military purpose. Next, and this one is absolutely critical, is distinction. It means armies have to do everything they can to tell the difference between combatants and non-combatants, between a military target and, say, a school or a hospital. You can only attack the military targets. This right here, this is really the heart and soul of the laws of war, protecting people who aren't part of the fight. All right, number 3 is proportionality. And this is where things get really, really tricky. It's basically a check on that first principle, military necessity. So even if you have a legitimate military target, you have to ask, is the harm you're likely to cause to civilians or civilian property excessive compared to the military advantage you're going to get? It's a tough, constant balancing act that has to be made in the heat of the moment. The 4th principle is called humanity. And this one is all about how you fight. What kinds of weapons and tactics are allowed? The main idea is to forbid anything that's designed just to cause unnecessary suffering. The goal is supposed to be to take an enemy combatant out of the fight, to achieve that military objective we talked about, not to be cruel for the sake of being cruel. And last but not least, we have honor. You might also hear it called chivalry. This is basically the no dirty tricks rule. It forbids what the law calls perfidy. So things like pretending to surrender just so you can ambush the enemy or, slapping a Red Cross symbol on a truck full of soldiers.
It demands a certain amount of fairness, recognizing that even in war, some deceptions are just completely off limits.
Okay, so those are the 5 big principles: military necessity, distinction, proportionality, humanity, and honor. But what does that actually mean on the ground, in the middle of a real conflict? Let's look at some specific examples. This is a really important one. Who counts as a lawful combatant? Because if you are one, you get all the protections of a prisoner of war if you're captured. So to qualify, you have to be part of a command structure, wear a uniform or some kind of distinct sign, carry your weapons openly, and this is a big one, you have to follow the laws of war yourself. If you don't meet those conditions, you could be considered an unlawful combatant. That means you might lose your POW status and could even be put on trial under the laws of the country that captured you.
And these principles lead to some very clear, specific rules. For instance, you can't attack doctors, ambulances, or hospitals that are clearly marked with a Red Cross or Red Crescent. You can't shoot at someone who's surrendering with a white flag. It's also forbidden to attack air crews who are parachuting out of a disabled aircraft. But check out the fine print here. That last rule doesn't apply to paratroopers who are dropping in to fight. They're still considered fair game.
So that leads us to the biggest question of all, right? It's nice to have all these rules on paper, but what happens when they get broken? I mean, really, is there any accountability? And the answer is yes. This is maybe the biggest change in modern times. Under international law, individuals can be held personally responsible for war crimes. We're talking everyone from the private on the ground all the way up to the general giving the orders. It's not just about nations being held accountable anymore, it's about people.
And there's a process for this. If someone is captured and they're suspected of breaking the rules, it's not supposed to be some random decision. A competent tribunal, basically a special hearing, has to determine their status. And even if they are found to be an unlawful combatant and lose POW protections, they still have to be treated humanely. The whole point is that it's a system of law, not just a system of revenge.
But this all leads to the future, and a huge question mark. You see, these rules were written for a world of soldiers, tanks, and ships. Today's battlefield is being completely redefined by things like autonomous drones, artificial intelligence, and cyber attacks that can take down a country's power grid without firing a single bullet. So the biggest question we face now is, can these principles, some of which are centuries old, actually adapt? Can you apply ideas like humanity and honor to a digital battlefield? And that's something we're all going to have to figure out.